Hello. Hello. Just waiting for the rest of the panel to arrive. So thank you for coming. Thank you for attending. This is the second event in a series of day-long conversations called Hidden Revealed. And the idea for this day is bringing together disabled artists to talk about their work, discuss their work. And we're talking about work that has some kind of connection or resonance with the British Museum collection or the exhibition programme. And it's the exhibition programme that we're kind of particularly focusing on for this talk because of the links to Arctic climate and culture. So we're joined today by Dr. Peter Loovers, who is the project curator for Arctic and is going to be facilitating this conversation. And we're joined by Juan and Khaled, who are the collaborators for the film In the Shadow of the Midnight Sun, which is what we're going to be discussing today. And the film, you should have received a link to this film. It's a work in progress, so it's exclusively for people that have signed up and registered for this event. So we're sharing this work in progress, which is really beautiful. So I urge you to watch that if you haven't already. In the link that you would have had in the reminder email, and in the tomorrow you'll get a reminder as well. So if you've missed it, there's another opportunity to get that link and watch the film, which I really strongly recommend. I'm going to do a little bit of kind of housekeeping things before I hand over for the main discussion. We have captions today, so we have live captions which are provided by Stage Text and My Clear Text. So you can click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen and that will bring up the captions. There's no chat function. We've turned off the chat function just because that makes it more accessible for people that use screen reader software. So there's no chat function, but questions, you can ask questions. So do please type in your questions into the Q&A box and we will receive them, and I'll be popping back at the end of the session to give the questions to Juan, Khaled and Peter. So we wanted to also acknowledge and highlight the fact that we don't have a Sami collaborator with us on this panel today, which was certainly the intention when we were putting together the event. One of the reasons for this is that tomorrow is Sami National Day, and it's a very busy time of year. And actually this year is the Jokkmokk market, which is the winter market, has been cancelled. So in 2021, Jokkmokk winter market has been cancelled. It's a tradition that's been going for over 400 years, and this is a really unprecedented decision that has been taken to cancel the market. And well, not obviously, but it is due to the issues with COVID and the fact that bringing people together at this time is not really possible. So we kind of wanted to acknowledge that that's a very busy time for people, and it's a very potentially kind of stressful and time for lots of people that would normally be taking part in these festivities and activities. So like I said, I'm going to pop back at the end of the session just to facilitate the question and answers, but I'm going to hand over to Dr. Peter Loovers, who has lots of experience of working with Indigenous people across the globe, but has worked a lot with the Gwich'in community in northern Canada, I believe. And Juan delGado, artist and filmmaker based in London, joined by collaborator and writer of the In the Shadow of the Midnight Sun, Khaled Alesmael, who is a Syrian Swedish writer. So I'm going to disappear now and hand over to our panel. I hope you enjoy the rest of the talk.
Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, I highly recommend everybody to see the working process of In the Shadow of the Midnight Sun. It's a beautiful, moving movie, and it really brought a lot of themes to the front that are similar, that I've been familiar with within the Arctic, and what we also display within the Arctic Culture and Climate exhibition. So Juan and Khaled, let's start with the beginning. So let's start with Khaled. How did you Khaled meet Juan?
Well, first, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for hosting us, talking about the shadow of midnight sun. Back to the year 2016, when Juan came to Gothenburg in Sweden to exhibit his work, Altered Landscape, in one of the really special gallery or platform in Sweden, in Gothenburg. And that movie or that work, Altered Landscape, was like directly speaking to the refugees movement happened in Europe in that time. And Juan and I wanted to do something like really to like a second part. I would like to go on with this project and do more. And the idea of In the Shadow of Midnight Sun started to develop and to grow up. That time, 2016, came from Juan.
So yeah, Juan, could you expand a little bit on how the movie came into existence?
Yes, in the work In the Shadow of the Midnight Sun, as Khaled said, was started being discussed with him when I presented my first part of Drifting Narrative, the trilogy, in Gothenburg. It was part of the festival, Clandestino Festival. You know, we started talking about how we could contract the part two of that narrative. I was very interested to read some of the stories that Khaled was writing in his book at that time, and how we could incorporate his own questioning about identity and displacement. So at that time in Gothenburg, I also had come across the city of Kiruna, which is in the north of Sweden. It was the first time for me to learn about this town of 20,000 people who were going to be displaced. And it was going to be displaced because the foundation of the city was very fragile due to the mining of El-Cap, a mine that very close to the city. So that's really for the first time rang my bell of looking to the north of Sweden. I started doing some research, and I found out that, for example, in that region also about 648 refugee or asylum seekers have been allocated by the Swedish government. And it was really striking for me to know that, because I mean, what happened to all these people put into a place that is in -20 degrees? So that was really the beginning of my curiosity, if you like, to learn more about Norrbotten. We both talk about Kiruna. We talk about, you know, some of the people that we suddenly connected with who were allocated as asylum seekers in Norrbotten. And then we started learning about the people who live there, the Sami. So that was the beginning of the conversation with Khaled.
Thank you. Following up on this, Juan and Khaled. So in the movie, you have Anna Karen. For those that have seen the movie already, this is the lady with the horses. And she identifies as she's Sami. And your movie takes place in Sápmi. Can you elaborate a bit on your collaboration with Sami?
Well, my methodology is a methodology of being in the place. I'm learning, I'm feeling the place. This is something I've done before in Colombia, in Palestine, in different other projects in which I had to be on the place to absorb the energy, to understand the dynamic of the people who live there. So obviously, watching filmmaking called the recce or pre-production, thanks to the Art Council, I was able to do some research in the north of Sweden and meet people from the local community. In 2017, for the first time, I went there and I started meeting asylum seekers who have been, for some of them, for 5-6 months, waiting for a decision if they could stay in the country or not. So I was having a conversation with them, and then I went back again in Christmas 2017, and I spent Christmas with a Sami family. So for the first time, I remember spending, hours in silence and just being there, coming from London, and with the urgency of start filming or bringing out the camera. I understood that the process of accessing the Sami was going to be a learning experience for me. In one of the conversations that I had with a Sami person, he said to me, thank you for coming to Sapmi, which is how the Sami call the region, but we don't need anybody from outside to tell our story. And that was really a reminder of my own questioning as a filmmaker or moving image artist about what is my role in this project, and how I want to develop a relationship with the subject, with the people I want to collaborate with. So I understood that I had to invest time, maybe that's not the word, investment, but spending time listening, being there, and really build a relationship that is based on trust. It was a long journey for me to learn how the Sami had been colonized for many generations. Obviously, many of the people I was meeting, despite of being very welcoming and generous, I could feel also some kind of reluctance to engage on doing a project like this. So one of the persons that we were talking to is Anna Karin. And Anna Karin lives in a small village near Kiruna. It's about 150 kilometers. She had many people from that community. It's a small community of 100 people who had been impacted by a mine, a copper mine called Aitik, that is just across the lake where they live. I couldn't understand how this community was going to be forced out. And we spent, Khaled and myself, we spent a few times talking to Anna Karin in the summer, and then we went back in the winter. And we're trying to understand, how possibly people in Sweden could also be, affected by for displacement. This is something that eventually we started getting this similarity of somebody like Khaled's experience of being displaced. I'm becoming a refugee in Sweden, it could equalize the story of many of these people in Sweden. So that really gave us the opportunity to start, thinking about the stories and the different ideas that we wanted to incorporate in the film.
Yeah, we'll delve a little bit further into this in a short while. Before I move to Khaled with the question, Juan, maybe you can just very briefly explain how you wanted to take up your, like what we have spoken about before, your collaborations with the Sami, and how that now became very difficult, if not impossible, because of COVID-19. So you intended to go back to submit this year and last year, if I'm understood.
Well, Sami become my home. I had to say that I feel very close to a place that the first time I arrived after traveling 21 hours by train, it felt very, very remote to me. It felt really like something that coming from Spain, from the Mediterranean, and having a very strong feeling of being European, connecting with, with every community in Europe. I connected with the struggle, the fight of the Sami, not only with the increasing industrialization of the area, also because of the raising of the temperature. We're talking of a climate that has changed and is changing very rapidly. I mean, we notice this climate changing in other parts of Europe, but it's extraordinary how people in the north, in the Arctic, is changing so quickly. One of the things that for me really motivated me is to feel how the Sami have always been people without any borders. You know, the idea of no border was resonating a lot in the motivation to engage with them. And basically, when COVID started, the pandemic, I mean, I never thought that they could have an impact on the Sami community, but it's like everybody else. And it's quite sad that, I mean, tomorrow we're celebrating the Sami Day. And for the first time, as Fiona said, in 400 years, the market is cancelled. So the winter market is a very important event for the Sami, not only economically, culturally. It's a moment in which the Sami come to Jokkmokk, which is a town in the north of Sweden, where for the weekend they trade, they meet, and there's a very important manifestation. So I mean today, I mean this weekend we're supposed to be connected with them, but obviously they're very busy now trying to adjust to the unexpected situation of having to close this market.
Yes, very unfortunate. So within the movie, there's coming back to the movie, there are some really beautiful sentences and really poetic from Khaled's words. And one of those sentences, Khaled, I found very powerful, which forms a bridge halfway into the movie to the question of displacement and identity, is a land that has known no sorrow for generations. That's what you're saying. And then there's this moment of silence. And when I was listening, I thought, well, yeah, I'm not too sure about that, like knowing about this history, a little bit of colonization. And then you follow it by, or at least that is what I thought. So could you expand a little bit further on this kind of epiphany? So you had this idea of this idyllic land, right? This beautiful kind of peaceful land, and especially you as a refugee from Syria, of course, there was this. There's that difference in, of course. But could you expand a little bit further on this particular sentence and that epiphany?
Yeah, sure. When I arrived to Sweden in 2014, I arrived as a war refugee to Sweden, and I'm still curious to learn about my new land, on my new destination. So I remember the first thing, because I'm as a person, I love history so much. I like to read the history of the countries and the people. I remember I started to read more about Sweden, and I felt like I arrived in 2014, where like exactly when Sweden completed 200 years without war, because the last war Sweden had with Norway, it was in 1814. So, and I was like really thinking of that, like how can a person like me and people like us as Syrians can navigate and like try to discuss or explain ourselves, you know, in a country that didn't experience the war since 1814. So, and this is exactly how I thought in the beginning. This is what I mean, you know, like later on when I like started to integrate and started to learn more about the people, the stories, you know, who are they, the Swedes, you know, not only in books. I start to meet them, to speak to them. So for example, the first person, the first Swedish person, I'm a native Swedish person, friend I made, he was from Kiruna. And the first story I heard from him, it's about the mine and that issues happening in the north, and about the Sami people conflict there and their history, and how they also they have their own culture and they have their own language, which I relate to, like as I came from Syria, which is like really multicultural country, a multi-language country. You know, Syrians can speak many languages, can speak Kurdish, Armenian, Syrian, you know, Arabic, and different and really many dialects. So so that's I started to learn, and I will never forget actually the first fika, this we call it in Swedish, like coffee and some cake I was talking about this subject. And I really wanted to reflect that in the work of Juan in the Shadow of Midnight Sun. So that's the story behind the sentence.
Yeah. Juan, from our previous correspondences, and maybe Khaled, you can also add to this. You have spoken about themes of forced displacement, and Khaled, you were just mentioning this, but those are the themes of adaptation and identity. So maybe both of you, could you expand a little bit on this?
Well, I mean, identity, I remember when I first read about Stuart Hall, and Stuart Hall say about identity, and identity is something very fluid, how identity is connected with that experience. So, you know, as much as we experience things, our identity is also flowing, it's changing. So I have my own idea about national identity, or identity that is fixed on something that is like a stone. And so I feel that something that it's very interesting to challenge. In the project, we move using intuition. We have our journey that we want to experience, following our gut, following, you know, the places that we wanted to go to. For example, you know, our first place obviously was Kiruna, because it's a place that it has this massive displacement of the whole city, being removed 5 kilometers west. But then we understood other communities that were not as visible, because Kiruna had been subjected to, you know, almost an invasion of international media, always looking for news, you know. So when I arrived there, the first visit, I could feel later on that people were reluctant to talk, because they felt it was an abundance of media suddenly trying to grab the news. So that's again was something that Khaled and myself were thinking how we can approach in a different way. And then, you know, our collaborators in another city, Bud, and Andras Andreas Fernandez, he mentioned about another mine that also was putting in risk a small village, the village of Mount Berger. So we traveled to that place and we found a huge pitch, a huge hole that had swallowed, was swallowing half of the town. So half of the people who live in that town had disappeared. They're gone. The community is gone. So in this journey of meeting people in that town, Mamberges and then Shakajarvi, who also were displaced because of the mine, we began to understand the complexity of this reality and how people were reacting towards something that was putting in danger the way of living for generations. I mean, at the moment, we're talking of a mine called Beowulf mine, who, funnily enough, is a UK registered company in Norway. And Beowulf is basically drilling or beginning to do drilling in a place that is the Sami considers a holy place, a place that is very, very important for the cultural heritage. So, I mean, this mine company had allowed by the Swedish government to start working in a place that is against the wish of the Sami who live there. So as an artist, we found ourselves in the middle of this reality that we weren't aware of when we started the project. So that's why we were trying to feel, is that the journey to go? Is the project is going to be more intimate, or we're going to open up to something that we feel is quite complex, because obviously we don't live in Norrbotten, Sapmi, we are not Sami, but we also terribly empathize with something that, as I said, many Sami had no certificates of property of the land, but they are claiming rights to the land, because when you ask, they say, well, we don't own the land provides us with the survival. And in this time of COVID, I think we should be listening to voices like this when say, non-car, no technology is going to make us survive, unless we respect, the land. And I think that this is something that is resonating very much in the voice of the many Sami that we interview, which they are not in the film, but they are in episodes that we have produced of different interviews that we conducted during the time being in the process of producing the work. So the work is not complete. We want to go back. We want to strengthen our relationship with the Sami that are collaborating in the project. And we feel that the voice needs to be amplified. People in Europe need to understand the situation. Perhaps we feel that art has also a role to play. I mean, I'm always challenging myself of how artistically articulate my work is, how much I am collaborating with other people and giving room to other people to contribute to the production of the narrative, whether the narrative is my narrative or the narrative of everybody involved in the project.
Khaled, so when you heard about these things that Juan just mentioned, like for example this the mine, could you share a little bit how that felt for you, like the kind of emotions that it's brought forth?
Well, as I talked before, like I learned about the mind from my Swedish friend from Kiruna, and also like more from the research about the Juan did about for his project. So I always like take it from as a writer, take it from a poetic side, and like I go to the human nature and the nature, you know, the people. I believe always, like as we humans, any stories talk about humans wherever they are, from the North Sweden, from Syria, from anywhere in this globe, it will speak to us. It will speak to, and we relate to, as it's about human nature and about our feelings and emotions. And one of the scene or the interviews, because it was filmed, I made with Anna Karen. It was like, I would say something, you know, taking you home and from Kiruna and like displace you, or the government, they will have to look after you and give you money or another house or something like that. But what I remember what she said, Anna Karen, it's about being forced to leave your home. This is the issue. This is the subject. This is your home. You build it. You chose every object, each object in this house. You chose your animal. Remember, even where she placed her dogs, or where she, you know, wanted her kitchen to be. So these details that few people can understand who are only forced to leave their houses. And I remember we were sitting in her garden, and she asked me with tearful eyes, like, just please tell me, how is it about to lose your home? And that moment, I was like really moved by a Swedish person from the north, like asking me this question. They want to learn from my experience. However, it was very hard, of course, to hear that and to be involved, but that's the reality we are talking about, and we are reflecting in this work and this movie. Like you are always, you could be, not always, you could be one day like in the situation or the place of Anna Karen or me as Khaled. So it's not about, I said also, it's the war of nature. There, it's not like the war as war. We know this concept and what it means, but it's the war of nature happening there in the north, where it forced people to leave their homes.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to the last question before we go to the audience questions. There's another, I mean, there were quite a number of these really I resonating sentences I found very powerful, but one of them that was really struck me, Khalid, was that at one stage you are saying, a little towards the end of the movie, feeling lonely because of the memory swimming, and I thought it was a very beautiful sentence, and it reminds me a little bit of what you just mentioned before. So could you expand a little bit more on this?
Can you just repeat the sentence?
So the sentence is, you're feeling lonely because of the memory swimming. And I was thinking now, when you speak about displacement and this ideas of home, and I think the other lady also says it's not just the home, it's life.
Yeah. You know, when someone is being forced to leave home and being refugee or displaced, so the first thing he wants to do or wants to focus on the plan of to go further or forward, not to go back to where he was or she was. But suddenly if you feel or like the memories are crowded in our inside us, in our hearts, in our brain, and all these images. So, and in this, the main protagonist of the film, which is me, So in this big place where you've been offered a new home and a new life to start again, but we find out that the memories are crowded and it comes to you, and you always compare between what you had before and what you are offering and what you are getting there, and it seems like what you lose, what you are forced to lose, it becomes in your minds bigger than it was even, you know. So it's like you become more attached to your past because it was taken from you. You didn't decide to leave it. So that's a conflict, you know. That's because you want to win, you want to go forward, you don't want to be stuck there. So this is the conflict I am talking about, which is many refugees. As a journalist and writer, I was listening to this kind of stories from almost really the majority of refugees. They agree about this point, that this conflict starts inside them when their new journey began somewhere.
And in the journey that we did in the train, again, it's a night train that starts from Gothenburg, stop in Stockholm, and it go all the way up to over 1,500 kilometers. This journey that Khaled and I did, you know, he was writing, and the whole process, a very creative process, took place as we were filming. We were learning about the landscape, but also, I guess he also was digging in his own experience. So the journey, it wasn't just a physical journey, but it was a very emotional, confronting a lot of emotion, sometimes very difficult. Both of us, he writing down and me putting the camera, finding places, location. We were following our own intuition that we really used all the way through. You know, when we met people who we met for the first time, and they were probably talking about places that we never heard before, we were just there listening and trying to understand, you know, again, all this narrative that seemed to be very detached from each other, eventually could find a common ground. And the common ground was a struggle for survival. And this is when suddenly I could see, you know, a similar narrative, similar experience from somebody coming from a torn country by war, you know, like Syria, with people who were also struggling, you know, to claim right to land, to preserve the cultural heritage. So that was a very, very intuitive process that we incorporate without any, I mean, I could say that we had a very rough script that we follow, but we also were very much listening to what was happening around us. And landscape has a very strong influence as well.
Thank you, Juan and Khaled.
Maybe this is a good time to come in and give some questions from the audience, if that's okay, because we have got lots of questions. So yeah, thank you for that. That was a really fascinating conversation, which I really enjoyed, and so have people at home, I think, as well, because we've got lots of comments from people who have seen the film and really enjoyed it. So just to remind everyone that didn't get the link yet, it's coming in a follow-up email, so you will get a chance to watch the film. So maybe just following on from what Juan you were just talking about in terms of the kind of process of making the film, and there's a question here which says that in the film Sami struggles comes through with great authenticity, And it's a question really for Juan, but I guess kind of for you as well. Juan, you say that you use an intuitive rather than ethnographic approach to filmmaking, and whether you could just talk about how you see the kind of differences in that and how it's important to your work.
This is a very interesting question. As a filmmaker and myself, artist, involved in connecting with group individuals that in many ways are forced to move or they're stuck with movement restraints. In other projects, I work in Palestine, or people with physical mobility. You know, I'm always trying to understand the role, why I want to tell the story of this story, and whether, you know, I own the story or the story is for me to facilitate through my own sensibility that the story can be presented in a way that is not sensational. It's not you know, I have this question all the time. When I was in Greece filming, I also, you know, I was in places that many refugees from Syria had told me I slept in this, under this bridge, across this road. And I was there with my camera, but also thinking, what is my role? Why I'm doing this? So I'm always trying to listen to my intuition, and I know I'm taking risks. I'm taking risks that maybe the story that I wanted to say or to tell is not unfolded in the right way. So I always try to give myself time to listen. One of the experiences that I really learned of being in Sami was let things happen. Don't force it, you know. And it's, you know, I've been struggling almost 3 years, you know, to complete the project, but the project has its own flow. And I'm very happy right now that we're talking about a project that is incomplete, you know. Why not? I mean, why it had to be completed? You know, it's a consequence of the world we're living in. So it's an extraordinary manifestation that we all connected. So when people say, well, is it your approach ethnographic? I'm trying to avoid label, but what I can say is my approach is very intuitive. I'm trying not to change anything. I'm trying to be there, listening. The camera is observing, but obviously later it's going to be a color with some sort of sensibility. That is my style as an artist, the way I work. You know, when the camera doesn't move, the camera is just, you know, filming whichever we decided to film. So that's why the style of the episode that you can watch online on the website, the style is quite different. And there's something here that I wanted to mention, that is the collaboration. For the first time, I've given my footage to people who are editors, who I never met. I don't know them. They are in India, from India, from Brazil, from Italy. They wanted to collaborate in the editing of the episode, because we wanted to have all these voices available to really create like a choral message that we felt that in 2020, 2021 is so needed, is so relevant at this stage.
That's great, yeah, and that reminds me that to add in the link to the website so people can watch the episodes as well, because they definitely do give a different flavour to the film. So I think it's nice to be able to see those as well. So Khaled, this is a question that I think maybe Director, you might be able to respond to, and it's about the interaction between the Sami people, Sami community, and the Syrian newcomers, it says. So how do you find that? And it says that Swedes are known for being quite reserved, or on the reserved side. And that is the Sami culture similar, or are they more sort of open to sort of this collaboration? And were the Syrian newcomers the first displaced community to be resettled there? Is the kind of, so the few elements to that question.
Yeah, thank you for this. And I will say hosting refugees or newcomers in the north was something not very common, because if you remember in 2015 there was news about like a group of refugees or asylum seekers. They were afraid to continue to the north, so they made a strike and they get off the bus not to go to the north of Sweden. That was like really kind of like, from my experience, one of the scary stories the refugees were talking about. Like, if you are unlucky, they will take you to the north because of the degrees and all the information, no sun, and like it's like kind of a hard or tough place to integrate and to live in. But at the same time, many refugees who were destined to go to the north of Sweden, they came back to when they after they got their papers or their residence permits, you know, so they have to find jobs and, you know, find other places to live in. So they told us incredible stories, and they said something about the generosity. All agreed about like how the people in the north, they reminded them of like some rural communities and people in the Middle East, like how they are generous, hosting like, and also include the people where you don't find this in the big cities in Sweden, like Stockholm or Gothenburg or Malmo. Like many newcomers, they were talking about how hard to access the Swedish society because people are more busy, and also like other things. So, and also other thing, one more thing I will add, like it's easier for the newcomers to learn Swedish in the north because people in the north speak more slowly, slower than because of the weather, the cold, so they speak very clear Swedish, you know. So so that's one of the great things actually. And I know someone who learned Swedish fluently, and he is a teacher. He's teaching Swedish to the newcomers to Sweden now, and he said to me that's one of the things like really you can get in the north.
Also, when we were in Lannavaara, Khaled was interviewing a couple, a Sami couple, and it was really striking for us to see how well informed they were about the situation of asylum seekers in Sweden and the whole politics going on. It was very moving for me to see Khaled sitting with them and talking about an experience that sometimes is difficult to talk about. You know, that's not part in any of the episodes. But it was a very striking experience to be in a very small village like Lannavaara is, and then, you know, talking about something is so international, is so relevant to everybody.
Thank you. That's fantastic. So I think there's another question here, which is, forgive me if my pronunciation isn't right. It says Heraclitus. Oh, God. And my pronunciation is really bad. Heraclitus says that every presence is an absence. So what is the representation of absence in the film? So that's a question, I think, for Juan and Khaled, but maybe Peter as well. It might be a question about the presence or the representation of absence in the exhibition, or sort of how the exhibition Arctic Climate and Culture has been put together as well. So it's about, yes, it's about the presence of in absence. So I don't know who wants to take that. Juan, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Well, absent is an element in the narrative of my work, in which I decide in previous work, I decide to take the actual body out of the film. So you watch the film with no bodies. There's no body in the film. No in the shadow of the midnight sun, but previous work, you are left as a viewer watching a story being unfolded, but there's no actual body being shown. And that is something quite deliberate, you know, through many years of talking with Syrians, you know, and how the media were portraying them, and yet they were saying, we continue being invisible. We are not being seen as human beings, as person, as individual. We're just a number. So in previous work, I decided to work on the subject of option, the option body, to trigger the curiosity of the viewer. Where are the people? Where are the people in this film? In the shadow of the midnight sun, I think the idea of option work in a different level. I mean, the Sami community has been an invisible community to the rest of Europe for many, many generations. I think it's only in the 2019, for the first time, the Sami were talking in Brussels. We are starting to listen to the situation of this community. So obviously, it's not my story. I can sympathize, I can empathize with that. It's not a story I want to tell. But what I really want is to see, you know, how in our Europe, you know, there's still a lot of invisibility. And this is the film that is, and this opportunity, and being with Khaled, and then Ricard, Sana, Jana Mangi, Peter, many other Sami, Torgate. I mean, Torgate, you know, he said to me, I'm not an activist, but my work is actually bringing, you know, a reality that many people, when we think about Sami, we think of the reindeer herders, but the Sami are a very, very diverse community. And Torgate, for example, he said, I am a Sami, a coastal Sami. So that's, he brings a new level of complexity in something that still remains invisible. And I think it's beginning to be more visible. And we want this film to contribute to that visibility.
And I don't know, Peter, did you have anything that you wanted to add in terms of the sort of presence of absence? I know, you know, one of the things about moving everything online is that actually there has been a lot of collaboration and and connection through sort of panel discussions and events program with different Arctic communities. So I don't know whether you wanted to say a little bit on that topic.
Yeah, indeed. I think Juan quite worded well how in a way how he did it with his film, and I think there's a lot of similarities with the Arctic exhibition. The Arctic exhibition at the front is this collaboration with Arctic indigenous peoples across the north, across the Arctic. So now being so in that way, there's an absence of not their physical presence of being in the exhibition, but at the same time they were collaborating a lot with how the exhibition should be shaped. There were 3 different commissions by indigenous artists that were incorporated into the exhibition. Now, what you're saying with the COVID-19, in that way, indeed, there's that big shift going online, which has enabled the participation of more indigenous contributors. Just because of the financial possibilities, right? We always have had intended to bring indigenous collaborators to London, but that would have been much less as now as possible. So, for example, for tonight there will be a Sami event with only Sami panelists. So that's another like example that would have been more difficult probably without this shift online. When it comes to this kinds of absence, I think like the film of Juan, it really speaks to this what art can do, how to tell a story. So I'm really thinking of this one print by Putlat, which is in the Arctic exhibition, and it's a Canadian military helicopter, and there's 3 animals dangling there. You got a polar bear, a muskox, and I think it's a reindeer, but I might be wrong. Sorry for the last animal, I forgot. A walrus. Sorry, it's a walrus, and it speaks about this displacement that that, like Sami, Inuit were displaced from the north, and it had to do with geopolitical intentions of showing that the Arctic was accepted. So people would have moved, instead of south, they moved to the north. And even animals were displaced at one stage. So I think that this one image, like the movie of Juan, can really bring this, make something present, even though it's absent.
Thank you for that. And I think we've only got a couple of minutes left, but there are lots of sort of thank yous that are coming in to the chat, and lots of people very interested in sort of looking forward to watching the film who haven't been able to. So I think we are going to have to stop the conversation there, but just to say a huge thank you to Juan and Khaled for joining us, for taking us through your the sort of work in progress, but this ongoing collaboration and work that you've been putting together, which is really beautiful, and for kind of explaining that and talking through us today. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. When this event finishes, there'll be a pop-up form which will be some feedback. So if you have feedback about the event, that's really useful to hear. And like I said, you'll be getting an email tomorrow which will include a link to the film, which is available up until Sunday, and a link we'll add in to the website, which includes the episode. So you'll be able to watch these episodes as well, which Juan spoke about earlier. So please do take the time to do that. And also if you want to give us some more in-depth feedback, there's a contact email. So you can, if you prefer to do it that way as well. We're always interested to have your thoughts, because moving everything online and doing digital events like this is new to us. So we're learning and we're trying to improve it, and we're trying to make it work for people. So please do let us know how it's working for you. Okay, so thank you, Juan, thank you, Peter, thank you, Khaled, for joining us. And
thank you, Fiona.
enjoy the film, everybody.
Thank you.